welcome everyone to what has become now a rather weekly tradition this year at the EU DisinfoLab, which is hosting webinars on diverse topics and initiatives and projects interesting the defender community against disinformation. A few housekeeping rules before we start. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel afterwards, so you can replay it. We are going to have a presentation followed by a Q&A session via Slido. We will not be looking at questions on the Zoom chat, so please join us on slido.com or by visualizing the QR code and using the code disinfo. You can already get started if you'd like to join us on the hashtag disinfo on slido.com. We would like to learn where you are listening to us from and which sector of the counter disinformation community you belong to. So let's get this started. So for today's topic, we are going to speak about a very timely and relevant project. We're going to learn about unique media identifiers. What are they? Why do we need them? And how can they help us in the fight against disinformation? This is a project launched by the Global Media Registry as an initiative fostering enhanced interoperability of measures to safeguard the integrity of our information space. And the project of unique media identifiers develops as an official ISO standard. So I believe that this is particularly relevant in order to look at experiences of harmonization and standardization, which is something that the defender community is increasingly moving towards. And to speak to speak about this today, I am joined by Olaf and Konrad. Olaf Steenfadt is the founder and managing director of the Global Media Registry, a charitable social enterprise that promotes transparency, accountability, and pluralism in the information space. He has a background in news reporting and investigative journalism. His signature projects, you might have heard of them, are the Media Ownership Monitor and the Journalism Trust Initiative. And Olaf has previously worked for national German public broadcasters and participates in expert groups of the European Commission and the Council of Europe. Today with us is also Konrad Bleyer-Simon. He is project lead at the Unique Media Identifiers at the Global Media Registry. He's a research associate at the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom at the European University Institute, and he's the coordinator and of the policy working group at the European Digital Media Observatory. He focuses on media policy, disinformation, and business of news media in his research. I'm very happy to leave the stage to Olaf and Konrad and to welcome them and thank them one more time for accepting our invitation. And we cannot wait to learn more about unique media identifiers. So thank you both. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maria, for the kind introduction. Thanks to EU DisinfoLab for the opportunity, which like you said, I guess it's quite timely. And thanks to everyone for joining. We know that I guess most of us are heading for a long, well-deserved weekend, so we try to make this as interesting and worth your time as possible, and maybe just dive right in to give you a quick kind of overview of where this whole project comes from, why I think this is maybe important question, why we choose this quite cumbersome but authoritative track of official ISO type industry standard setting. I think it's maybe useful to discuss a few use cases, but also hear from you where and how you think this could be useful, or maybe also what are the limitations in this regard. And last not least, we can share a bit more of information and details how exactly we believe this project and initiative will work. So why do we do this and where does the idea come from? I think integrity of information or integrity of the whole information space is more and more becoming kind of a buzzword. And wherever integrity or authenticity is needed, obviously ambiguity is the opposite and the enemy. And this is no matter if we talk about the unique media identifier or any other technical standard, the main purpose to fight and to reduce ambiguity. When we speak about digital communication and distribution of information, obviously human beings, but also algorithms can be confused quite easily. And this is one of the main problems, not only because it makes the consumption of news and information more difficult, but maybe even more importantly, and this is why we do this together with the EU DisinfoLab, because it can be capitalized on as a weakness by bad actors. Very few examples. If you try and find TV station or media outlets that are called NTV, there are dozens and dozens, literally probably hundreds of them. And it sounds a bit silly, but it's not really easy to differentiate or to distinguish between them. Other examples are brand names like ABC or TV2 or channel frequency names of radio stations, which obviously in a global information space are easy to confuse. Another example from Germany, where I'm from, which again sounds maybe a bit silly, but it is actually a real one. Our most, I think, important by means of circulation tabloid newspaper is still Bild-Zeitung. And then there is Bild-Blog, which is actually the opposite. It's a watchdog. They call out Bild-Zeitung for all their ethical breaches and mistakes they make. Algorithmically speaking, Bild-Zeitung and Bild-Blog are quite close together, and they got confused and mixed all the time, which, as you can imagine, neither of the two likes very much. Another example is Al Jazeera, where I guess everyone has kind of an understanding what it is. Obviously, it's one corporation based in Doha, in Qatar. But in practical terms, it splits into, as far as we know, 16 different TV channels in different territories, obviously in addition to the global English one. And they actually do have very distinct and different editorial lines. So it makes sense to distinguish between them. Again, algorithmically speaking, it's not that easy, to say the least. Another brand name which gets confused quite a lot is Phoenix. So in Germany, our C-SPAN public parliamentary channel is called Phoenix on the left. Obviously in Arizona, you have quite a few media outlets called something with Phoenix. And then you have a large, I mean, huge even, media conglomerate based in China that's called Phoenix. And of course, it does make a difference which Phoenix is which. And I mentioned this already, and thanks to this EU DisinfoLab and the doppelganger research, we know and have a lot of evidence that imposters and bad actors capitalize on basically faking, copying brand names and pretending to be Le Figaro or Der Spiegel or Deutsche Welle or the BBC continuously, which is not only a problem for consumers, but also for advertisers and the media outlets, the legitimate original ones themselves. When we speak about unique identifiers, obviously this is nothing we invented, but there are already quite a few. Actually, I think as human beings, but also as companies, we are surrounded by many, many unique identifiers. I think you all know ISBN for books, a license plate on a car is a unique identifier, or a URL on the internet, your tax ID. And maybe to illustrate a bit more how an identifier, again, one that you all know, which is an airport code, a three-letter airport code works. Here's a quick video, and I hope it plays in my presentation. Here we go.
There are thousands of airports To find the answer, we need to divert this flight to YUL, the Canadian city that's capital of codes, Montreal, where is headquartered IATA, the International Air Transport Association. It's not a governmental organization, more an independent aviation agency for airlines, where they work to make airports and airplanes increasingly interoperable using humanity's most exciting and powerful, yet oft-maligned as dull tool, standards. One of which is the IATA Airport Code, 3 letters to identify every airport in the world, from the most connected to the least. All are coded so companies can communicate clearly and concisely complicated connections to carry their customers and their bags. And actually, the code IATA created isn't only for airports. Rather, technically, it's a location code for all kinds of transportation interchanges, like plane stations that connect to train stations, such as Amsterdam Schiphol, which is just so intermodally epic. Okay, let's try not to get distracted by efficient infrastructure. Easier said than done. Here's how the IATA code is supposed to work. One airport, one code, which is unique because airport names are not. Booking passage to Portland? Cool, that could be Oregon or Maine or Victoria, Australia. Ambiguity is the enemy. International flying creates communication connections between every language on Earth. So the IATA code helps when you don't speak Greenlandic or Odia, but still need to book a flight to Kangerlussuaq via Bainswar. I'm so sorry, Greenland and India. Instead of Mongoling pronunciation, it's just SFJ via BBI. Much clearer, not just for you, but also for the ground crew getting the bags through. Ideally, the IATA code comes from the first 3 letters of the location, like with Gibraltar, where Gibraltar Airport is given GIB, Gib Gibraltar. So going to Cork, it'll be COR, Core Ireland. Oh, that didn't work. Seems Cordoba, Argentina built their airport first and got COR ahead of Cork, so ORC for Cork. Tough noogies, ORC Germany. That's an adorable town name you've got there, but you're going to need to pick something else for your code. Thus, there are thousands.
So I guess I'm going to stop there, but this video is actually quite funny and informative, so I'm inviting you to carry on watching it. As a German, I felt immediately motivated to fact check if there is really a place in Germany called ORC, and I'm not sure, definitely not one with an airport. But anyway, I guess you got the point. When we speak about identifiers, obviously not only in literally any other industry around us, but also in the media sector, a lot of IDs already exist. Tech platforms using it, advertisers use IDs for all sorts of purposes. Regulators do it, and also NGOs. And there are some also ancillary projects and indicators currently in the making, like, for example, some of you might have heard of C2PA, which is an identifier for content provenance, basically watermarking individual pieces of content for authenticity. And so my point, I guess, is that this is not about inventing something new. Many of those codes exist already with a distinct purpose, but it's about harmonization, about more or less creating a missing link between existing identifiers, both in our space, but maybe also others that might be relevant. I'm just seeing here the abbreviation GLIFE, which actually I didn't know previously, and that's the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. I'm basically doing what it sounds like, so producing global identifiers for legal entities, and obviously those legal entities are also important for our purpose here when it comes to tracing down, for example, media ownership and ultimate beneficial owners as well. So this is, if you think of it like building blocks, different projects, initiatives, and data points, even at the end of the day, existing already that could and should fit together. Now, if we speak about industry standard setting as a tool, maybe we can go quickly through a few points why we believe this is useful to implement the unique identifier for media. One principle we believe is self-regulatory. Industry standards are per definition the opposite of a law. It's a bottom-up process of a sector or an industry to basically come together and find a convention and common ground on certain issues. Secondly, always and every industry standard is driven by demand. It only materializes if stakeholders and the industry as such believes in it, needs it, and finds a consensus to publish the final standard document. If this doesn't happen, it cannot be imposed top down. It simply wouldn't materialize. The third principle of industry standard setting is interoperability per definition, but it's also non-proprietary and open source. So nobody really owns it. It's curated and maintained by international standardization bodies and organizations, but it's not proprietary in a sense that you can withhold it or keep it from somebody using it. So what we've done is we actually applied with the International Standardization Organization, ISO, to start this process, and it was adopted end of last year, and found one national standardization body, one ISO member to facilitate the process, which is the German ISO member DIN. So DIN is actually facilitating and leading this project, and we will speak a bit later about how this works in practice. Maybe a final point I want to make under this heading is that this particular project, a bit like the airport codes, is totally neutral and agnostic. It is not a value judgment. It is not about good or bad. Just like the airport codes don't tell you how long a runway is. They just make a distinction who is who. And this is exactly what we believe is needed, but also very much important to mention it here, that this is not about trustworthiness or authenticity in a way that it means good or bad. It's just the pure designation of identity, which we believe is also an added value. And with this, I'd like to pass it on to Konrad.
Thank you, Olaf, and thank you for the organizers for inviting us. So I'm briefly going to talk about the use cases of unique media identifiers, because once we have these identifiers, we also need to use them for something. And we identified 3 areas for that in our discussions. One of them is the media industry, the second one is civil society, and the third is the public sector. So first, I'm going to talk about the media and information industry actors. And these examples that you see on the slide are not all the possible uses. These are the ones that we identified in our discussions with different stakeholders who are involved in the process. So one of them is the use by online platforms such as Facebook, TikTok, or many others to inform their content recommendation processes, or the way content shows up on their feeds. I think most of you know the European Media Freedom Act and its infamous Article 17, which if I'm right, it now is Article 18 in the compromise text, which would recommend a system of special treatment for verified media outlets. In a case where this would be used, and if this would be applied, this would mean that social media could rely on the list of unique media identifiers to assess whether specific accounts on social media belong to a given news media outlet. So in that case, you wouldn't need to have all companies assessing the credibility of every social media profile separately. There might be an entity that does so for the news media, and then social media profiles can just, or social media companies can just rely on that. This is one example, but there are many others. The next one is brand safety for advertisers. As you know by now, many advertisers are affected by programmatic advertising and or the problems or side effects of programmatic advertising, which means that often their content might show up next to disinformation content or on disinformation websites. And a tool like the unique media identifiers could also help. Of course, I have to emphasize what Olaf already said, that these are objective indicators that we have. So we're not going to talk about whether a piece of or whether a publisher is trustworthy or not. We just say that, or not we, but the unique media identifiers will just say that specific media outlets or specific social media profiles belong to that or that publisher. The next point is compliance and reputation management by the media industry. So this is straightforward. If you are a media publisher, it's in your interest to make sure that the imposter account that pretends to be you is not you. And if you have a number, a unique identifier that can make sure that you can prove that only certain kinds of accounts or publishers or outlets belong to you, then it makes the situation much clearer. And I would probably skip the last point because we're running out of time, or not running out, but there are still many more slides. But there was the question of AI, which I would briefly mention. So when we thought about unique media identifiers, we didn't see artificial intelligence a necessary component, but we always get this question, and we can say that it can definitely be used in the context of AI. For example, it's quite useful when it comes to the training of AI or generative AI, because it would make it much easier to identify which sources a company could rely on when training its algorithms. But it can also be used for social media recommendation algorithms, because it will make it much easier for them to identify trustworthy content and show that to their audiences, or the kind of content that they are interested in. And then we can go to the next slide. So these are uses for the public sector, and we've seen that many media regulators are already interested in the unique media identifiers, because in the online environment, it's really hard for them to figure out who exactly they are regulating. There are lots of international actors in every national media ecosphere. There are many actors who are not registered. There are influencers, there are fringe media, and the unique media identifiers are seen by them as a way to create some order in the system, and also to exchange information with other countries if needed. The next point is contribution to media development and support. We heard from the media development community that unique media identifiers could help them identify whether certain publishers they support are producing the kind of content that they were really aiming to support, or it can also help them to identify who could be potential grantees for them. And then we can go to the next slide, the third form of usage, which is civil society. So there's a lot of discussion nowadays about media literacy. There are lots of NGOs who are involved in the field, and for them, unique media identifiers can be a great tool to empower audiences, because it can become a tool which helps any user, you or me, to identify whether the piece of content that is shown to you on social media or in Google or anywhere else is actually what it says it is. And it can help you trace back the source of this information. And then the last point is upgrade for research and civil society action. So there are lots of great uses for it also in academia and media studies, and it makes it just much better and much easier to understand the media environment as it is. And then we can go to the next slide, which is almost the last one. You might ask how the unique media identifiers work, or how they are going to work. And We are still working on it. We are still in the ISO process, figuring out with different stakeholders how we what we expect in the end, or how it's going to look like. So we have this IWA workshop, and we have 80 members who are contributing to the discussion, and we have 3 working groups where we try to figure out what the different aspects of it would be. One of them, which looks at one of the great questions, is how the form of this unique media identifier would look like. So basically, this is going to be a unique key. It can be just a number, a 10-digit number. It can also include letters but yeah, these are basically the options, but in different combinations. But there's also the question whether it should include some kind of metadata and what that metadata should be. So should it also include information on the owner? Should it include information on the country where it's registered, the country where it operates? We have to figure this out also depending on what the use cases are going to be in the end. And who the interested parties are going to be. The next question, once we figured out how this unique media identifier is going to look like, is who's going to be in charge of it, who's going to manage it. So these media identifiers have to be assigned somehow to a media. There are many different ways to do so. It's possible that media identifiers can apply. It's also possible that they were just automatically allocated to any media outlet. It can also be a mixed system. We have to figure out what works best. There are pro arguments and arguments against it. It's still a discussion, and we also have to see who is going to manage these unique keys. Is it going to be media regulators? Is it going to be social media platforms? Maybe that can also be a possibility. And we also have to figure out how this process can be sustained, how it can be financed in the end. And then the third point is the assurance of integrity, transparency, and security. If we have a tool like this, which can identify what social media profiles belong to what publisher, it can also easily be misused. So for us, when we think of it, it's a tool to create transparency, but such a tool could also be misused by rogue states to look at it as a list of media outlets that should be banned. We definitely don't want to do that. We don't want to help dictators in this process. So for that reason, we are going to start discussions with experts on how to make sure that the misuse is going to be prevented, and that the UMids are going to be a trusted resource that cannot be hacked, that cannot be misused, and can be used for the greater good of the industry and audiences, and that can empower news media actors. And I think that was the last question before we go to your questions here.
Thank you, Konrad, and thank you, Olaf. We are also perfectly on time. Yes, thank you for stop sharing your screen. So now we can maybe share ours. And I see that on slido.com, using the code disinfo, you can ask your questions. I saw that there are quite a few questions already. So people were paying attention. That's great. I will start reading them right away, and either one of you can address them. So the first one is the system accessible to smaller media outlets or independent content creators with limited resources?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. I think this is one we asked ourselves in the beginning as well, of course, because it should not discriminate anyone. And this relates a lot to the point Konrad made earlier about how it's being issued. We believe in the end, and it's still to be worked out, it's not working on an application basis or somebody actually making a decision, but if it's issued almost automatically, at least as a first level, of course, size doesn't matter. So this means anyone can get it equally, regardless of size. And by the way, also, and this is an important point, like I meant earlier, not only legitimate media outlets should get an identifier, but also bad actors to be able to handle them properly, if that makes sense.
Of course. Thank you for that. So the next question is, and I believe that's a very legitimate concern. Can you speak about the main challenges of reaching consensus among different stakeholders, and if it is difficult to work within the ISO process? I imagine that sometimes it can sound quite intimidating to approach this sort of very technical process, although it's on the other hand, ensuring a job well done, I would say.
Yes, this is a question we ask ourselves at the moment as well, because we are still early on in the process. So we've just started. And it's a little bit, I guess, early to tell. My hunch, and maybe also, and Konrad can share his experience as well. And we have, I think, also some stakeholders from our workshop in this call, which is great, is that the biggest challenge for consensus is even the challenge for common understanding between two main camps. So we have a group of stakeholders in this workshop that have no clue or track record whatsoever about media, because they come from the standardization identifier industry or world. They usually work on supply chains and other industries. And they really have to understand what makes the media sector so sensitive and different from t-shirts or, I don't know, petroleum. And then on the other hand, you have the group of stakeholders that are us, basically, people somehow related to the media sector, that first of all need to kind of dive into the logic of how identifiers, validation work technically. And so this is kind of the main challenge, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, maybe I would add that, yeah, it might be a bit early to say, but so far I had only good experiences. So whenever we had issues of disagreement on something, it always turned out to be a misunderstanding, and in the end we could always talk it out with the actors who are the stakeholders who are involved. And it's probably also because before this whole process could start, the different standards organizations already had to signal whether there is a competing whether there's a competing standard or some standard with which we would interfere, and it turned out that it's not the case. So in the end, there aren't really interests out there who would want to block it, but there might be bad actors who might want to block it. But in the end, the industry and the people who we work with are all interested in this becoming reality. And it also seems like all the people who are involved are really enthusiastic about it. So yeah, so for now, I think all the experiences with the process are really positive.
That's great. And speaking about bad actors, I think that we can take two questions together, because I see some similarities, although we don't see them both on the screen. So I will read them. One is the one that you see on the screen, which is, you mentioned the media privilege. How would you ensure that the unique media identifiers are not weaponized by malign actors cloning reputable media, as in doppelganger? And there is another question which would make sense to address together, which is how to make sure that the media outlet using an identifier is not just another imposter. How do you prevent the misuse of identifiers? So I see similarities between these two questions. If you could take them, that would be actually very interesting for us. When I first came across your project, I thought this could be an interesting countermeasure for a case such as doppelganger. So I would really be eager to hear more about this.
Yeah, I guess maybe Konrad, you can speak to the point of media privilege when it comes to imposter and validation. Obviously, this is part of the recommendation or suggestion we are going to develop for the actual standard document as an annex, how it's going to be operated. And this must obviously include some form of validation, which usually in other industries happens in a conversation with the owner of a specific media brand. And then if you are, let's say, ZDF in Germany, of course, you're the one to say, those assets like social media accounts belong to me. And this is then a positive definition and list where any other claiming to be ZDF is just automatically out. And of course, the main challenge then is to keep this up to date all the time. Our impression is that this has been nearly solved in other industries as well, in the field of brand protection, but also consumer protection, which is not 100% safe, but close to 100%. And the identifier, and this is maybe a little bit a segue to the other question, and we really need to reiterate and emphasize this, is nothing new. Of course, Meta or TikTok do have identifiers already today, and every audiovisual regulator has an identifier or list of identifiers. Anyone who manages a list or data set, the first column always is a number or an ID. So that's not changing. What we are adding to this issue, or as an added value, is harmonization between already existing identifiers.
Yes, and regarding the media privilege, I mean, of course, we don't know how exactly the media privilege is going to look like, but let's imagine that you're the BBC and you want to get special treatment on social media. One way to do so would be to communicate with the issuers of the unique media identifiers and share with them a list of social media accounts that you take responsibility for. In that case, the social media service providers won't see these profiles as BBC, but let's say they will see them as 11x50. And all the other BBC profiles, the fake ones, will have completely different numbers. So in that case, they don't have to check all the BBC accounts one by one to figure out whether one of them is an imposter, because they would have a list of social media accounts that are guaranteed to be operated by that company, which would also mean that they would take the responsibility. I guess many social media accounts would have a three-strike policy. In that case, if BBC's first, second, and third social media account has published this information, that would count as one, and they would, in this hypothetical situation, would lose their privilege, I assume. I mean, this is just one thought experiment, how this might play out. And if there is a media privilege, that would also mean that those media who want to consider themselves or who want to be considered trustworthy, they would cooperate with the process. So it would basically speed up the process, because they would gain something with it. They would have a special position on social media. They wouldn't be removed. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that there are other questions on the screen, but I thought it would be easier probably to ask this one that I'm seeing on Slido. We have enough time to take them all, I believe. So in view of what you were saying, I expect a rather positive answer to the following question. What role do you see for unique media identifiers in facilitating digital platforms' obligations under DSA? For example, I assume regarding content traceability and the protection of users' rights online.
Well, first of all, what we can say is that the DSA task force is participating in this exercise with an observer seat in the workshop, which kind of illustrates obviously that they more than just take note of this exercise. In the end, I think a big discussion we sense in the DSA task force and also around it is cross-industry collaboration. So when platforms, for example, report on their code of practice commitments and it comes to mitigating risk, it's always a question of scaling moderation, scaling fact-checking. And if there is a lot of redundancy in the system because one video clip popping up on TikTok and YouTube and Facebook and everywhere is fact-checked 3, 4, 5, 6 times, it can actually, if there is a unique identifier to harmonize this, maybe be done much more efficiently and much faster, even more so when it comes to escalation cases where time is really of the essence. So this is kind of the dimension I see here when it comes to DSA obligations, but there might be more.
Yeah, I think there can be a lot more, maybe even uses that we didn't even think of so far. But there's one thing that I would emphasize, that we are focusing on publishers and not content. This is also one of the questions below. And that also means that we are part of a bigger universe of identifiers, or can be part of a bigger universe of identifiers, which might include identifiers that are tracing content across social media. And we are not competing with each other. We also have members in the process who work on these aspects, and these different aspects can then together contribute to a much greater or much more transparent media environment.
Which probably is a good segue to the next question. How is the human distinct from any ordinary URL? What we found also while developing this project and now working on it, ambiguity, we talked a lot about ambiguity already earlier, is existing a lot in terms of terminology. So what do we mean when we say media outlet? Or what do we mean when we say channel or brand or asset or even country or market? And so part of this project is to really have a common understanding around terminology and definitions as a kind of condition to develop this data model. I mean, this is at the end of the day what we are doing here. It's a data model. And in this, I think at least where it stands right now, in this set of definitions, we talk with the unique media identifier and target the level of the media outlet, which for us is an editorial entity, a newsroom, or it could be one person in an extreme sense, but it doesn't have to be a legal entity. As we know, many newsrooms or media outlets or brands don't have a legal personality because that's one level up. And then one level down, under the media outlet, you have several distribution channels, and a URL is one distribution channel. It's a website. Another distribution channel could be a social media account or a streaming channel or an FM terrestrial radio frequency or a printing press and a printed paper. So these are all different channels under one media outlet that would carry the unique media identifier.
Yes, and I would add that the URL would be a fantastic unique media identifier if all of us would be consuming content just on websites, typing the URL and then checking what's on, I don't know, spiegel.de or bbc.co.uk. But yeah, as Olaf said, we are the current information environment is completely different, so we need to have more complex and different unique media identifiers.
Thank you for that. I think that's much clearer to all of us. So the next question is, how are the media news outlets involved in the project? How is the project perceived by established media? And maybe I can couple it with another question also on stakeholders, which is, do you work with fact checkers? What benefits could they have from this project? I think you partially already addressed this, but maybe you can clarify it a bit more.
Yes, it might sound a little bit harsh, but actually media outlets are the object here. A bit like a citizen who receives or gets a tax ID, you don't have a choice, you just get it. And this is probably the same logic here. Of course, we don't want media outlets or publishers to oppose this system, but they are not an active part in, at least as we see it, in having to apply to get a unique identifier, which, by the way, is a little bit different than the system works for ISBN books. So if, as a publisher, you want an ISBN for your book, you have to apply for it actively, and this means you have to have a reason and incentive for it. And in the book publishing industry, the incentive is that without an ISBN, you cannot go through the wholesale distribution. You can still sell your book wherever else, but this is how it works. So publishers must want an ISBN. We believe in our case it's different. A possibility that we might see is, and this was brought up in one of the latest round of our workshops, is a tiered system where the basic tag is distributed just automatically almost, so you don't have a choice, you get it, be it a bad actor or a legitimate publisher. And then a bit like with Google Maps, when you have a flower shop at the corner of the street, you get automatically a position point and display on Google Maps unless you oppose. And then you can click claim this business and add your opening hours and pictures and whatever else you want, which might also a possibility here to open up an option for publishers to tag or tie or connect curated information with the unique ID to travel with it.
Yeah, I would also mention that journalists were not excluded from the process, so they had a chance. If they would be interested, they would have a chance to join. We advertised this publicly, but there weren't too many journalist organizations or journalists or media outlets applying, probably because they wouldn't have the time to participate in that process. I think we maybe had one or two. And
maybe just to contradict myself to what I said earlier, and this was one of the surprises, like Konrad said before, we always discover new use cases as we move forward. And one was that obviously media outlets do have a vested interest to protect their brand against copycats and imposters, which particularly for global broadcasters is a really burning issue to protect their brands, and most of them call it compliance. So this is also why some of them participate in this project.
And then regarding the question on fact checkers, whether we cooperate with them and how they would benefit, we do cooperate with them. So we have I think 3 or 4 organizations that are fact-checking organizations that are part of the process. And one of them asked me the same question. I don't remember what exactly I told them, but they signed up. So, and I guess that convinced them. And of course, there is a difference in the approach here, because most fact-checking organizations are interested in the content that is published and not the publisher. So they don't care whether it's published by me, you, or Russia Today. They will look into it and they will look at the arguments used. But when it comes to assessing the sources of an outlet, that is a possible use of the unique media identifiers, or where it's published, or whether the same content was then republished by the same actor under a different name, or someone else. So to understand the whole environment of this information, I think it makes sense, and it can also speed up the fact-checking process, in my opinion.
Yes, and regarding this last point Konrad just made, I mean, at the end of the day, we talk about interoperability of large data sets. And of course, fact checkers these days handle very large data sets. And when they exchange information between them, fact checkers, amongst fact checkers, but also ups and downstream the supply chain of fact checks, of course, it's important to have this in a machine readable format that is interoperable. And this is where these IDs make a lot of sense.
Great point. Also, I believe in the track of access to data, which is something that the Defender community is interested more and more. The next question is, could the digital services coordinators be responsible for managing them being unique media identifiers, I assume, and take a second of shameless self-promotion to remind you that last week we had a webinar exactly about digital services coordinators, so make sure to watch it in case you missed it, but please.
Yes, why not? I mean, thinking about this, probably initially I would more at this point see them as a use case. Most probably this would make their lives a lot easier as well. When it comes to governance, I'm not exactly sure if this is meant by managing them. It will most probably be a mixed public-private way of running and operating this. And I'm not exactly sure because currently we see so many different models of digital services coordinators in different countries, how it's being kind of mandated, what the actual organization is taking on this role. I'm not exactly sure. Like Konrad said earlier, most probably audiovisual regulators will be involved. Maybe not so much public authorities like ministries, I hope.
But of course, there are cases when the digital services coordinator is actually the media authority, the audiovisual media authority. So, but even in that case, they wouldn't take up this role in their position as digital service coordinators, but as a media regulator. But there would be an overlap. And then, of course, there is this problem that we might also need to address at some point, that there are some cases where media regulatory authorities are captured by the state. What can we do in that case? So we also have to work out the safeguards. So I think it's early to say yes and no on this question, but it would be a good option if we have the relevant safeguards there as well.
Thank you. We're running out of time. I believe that we can have you reply to the last two questions. Given the multiple identifiers already in use across the tech and ad sectors, how do you plan to harmonize these other frameworks without multiplication of efforts? Well, I believe that what type of media content you sort of already addressed, in the sense that you're more focused on the actors rather than the content. And then maybe grand finale, if you could say something to the audience about the timeline of the project.
Sure. Quickly on the first question, it depends a little. So one dimension of harmonization is to really to do it in a complementary way. And this is where we see the unique media identifiers being the missing link between C2PA, which is content provenance, and the legal entity identifier, which already exists. So as it stands right now, we expect the unique media identifier to become the source identity tag in the C2PA. And then the legal entity identifier being plugged into the unique media identifier for this part of who is actually owning this media outlet. So this is totally complementary. The other dimension is what I said earlier, that of course many stakeholders already have their own proprietary IDs. And my expectation would be that they will just keep them and add a second column to their spreadsheet where the unique ID would be, fed in and then basically synchronized. So it's not replacing anything, but just basically an additional level of harmonization.
Yeah, and it would also mean that they wouldn't need to do the work themselves in the future. So if there is the unique media identifier that can already show them what media outlet or no, what social media profile belongs to what outlet, they won't need to make the same research themselves again. So of course they would have their own identifiers for the ones that for the ones for whom they already did the research, but in the future they can of course decide to double check what we did, but it can be a good source for them.
And maybe regarding the timeline.
Exactly. Yeah.
So industry standard setting is a nightmare of acronyms. I think we missed to explain one which was in the presentation, and that's IWA. That's the official format of what we are doing, called International Workshop Agreement, which is usually scheduled to take place for about a year. So I expect to publish the actual deliverable, which is the ISO standard document, by the end of the year. But this is only one milestone because an IWA has a lifetime of 3 years. Usually it can be prolonged or extended once. So the maximum lifetime is 6 years. And this time will be needed to actually turn this workshop agreement into an official ISO 9 whatever standard, which would also include a lot of testing and calibration along the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I believe that our time is up. I would like to thank you both, Konrad and Olaf. You made a very technical topic very interesting and easy to follow. And I'm also really glad that our audience was very active in asking questions, and I really am sure that they made the most out of this session. I would like to remind you that the recording of this webinar is going to be available on our YouTube channel and on our website. I would like to invite you to join into the next webinars that we have planned for April with DisinfoLab, DigiConnect, and ProPublica. And at the end of this session, you will be redirected to a rating page. So make sure to sort of leave your review and also let us know what more you would like to see covered in our webinars. And once again, Konrad, Olaf, thank you so much. Thank you also to my dear colleague Maria for the logistics help behind the scenes. And I do hope to see you next time, and also wish you luck on this unique media identifiers project. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.